Good morning, everyone that's joining. Welcome to today's session. We're going to get started very shortly. My name's Louise Herring. I'm representing AIM Progress, one of the partners in this project. You're very welcome to today's session. Just while we're waiting for people to come in, we'd like to encourage you to use the chat function. Let us know, let us know where you are in the world, what organisation you represent, if you're happy to, your name, and anything else about your interest in meaningful stakeholder engagement. Please do feel free to use the chat as people are coming in, just so we know who we've got on the call, where you are in the world, and what organisation you represent. So you're very welcome. We're going to start in a couple of minutes. Just need to allow a bit of time for everyone to come in via Zoom, and then we will get going. Thank you, Celine, for getting us started. Thank you. Lovely to see people in the chat letting us know where they are. I think from the registrations, we've got very good representation from across the world. So good morning, everyone that's joining. Please do use the chat and let us know where you are, which organisation you work for, any other interesting facts about your involvement in meaningful stakeholder engagement so far. Thanks very much, everyone that lets us know where they are. We've got some people in Sweden, we've got people in Brussels, Milan. Great to see the Netherlands, someone in Cambodia. Very nice to have you here. We're hoping we will get a few people from Asia on this morning slot, so that's really great. Brilliant, thank you very much. Thanks, Eleanor, for sharing you're interested in this and the fact that you worked on it before in your dissertation. That's great. Thank you very much indeed, everyone. Really appreciate you sharing where you are. So if you are just coming in, we've got a few more people coming in slowly. Please do share in the chat who you are, who you work for, any interesting facts about meaningful stakeholder engagement or your involvement in the topic so far. And you're very welcome to today's session. Right, we are going to get started officially. So good morning, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you are. And welcome to today's session, which is the launch webinar of a practical guidance on meaningful stakeholder engagement for companies in the agriculture and food manufacturing sector. My name's Louise Herring. I'm the Executive Director of AIM Progress, one of the organisations who've been involved in the development of this guidance. You can see the organisations that have been part of it on the slide in front of you, and you'll be hearing from the majority of them during today's session. I'm going to cover a few bits of housekeeping, do a very brief introduction, and tell you what we can expect from the session today. So today's webinar is going to be recorded. The recording will be available. The slides will also be available. We would like you, any official questions that you have, so as we go through, any questions that you've got for the speakers, please do use the Q&A function. So for those of you who might not be familiar with Zoom, it has both a chat and a Q&A function. The chat is there for you to continue telling us where you are in the world, who you work for, and what your interest in this topic is. But please, if you've got questions, then you need to use the Q&A function. I'm just seeing a comment in the chat that there's an echo in the audio. Is anyone else having that from the presenter side? Great. Okay, thank you very much. We'll carry on. So that's the housekeeping for today. We'll just ask everyone, please, to keep your comments and your questions constructive and helpful, but we really do want your feedback and are really interested in the questions that you have. In terms of the context of today's webinar, just wanted to give you a little bit of context about where this guidance has come from. This conversation about developing the guidance started actually almost a year and a half ago at the UN Forum in Geneva. We gradually over time brought together a group of interested organisations, so AIM Progress, amfori, the ETI in the UK, ETI Sweden, Fair Labour Association and the Food Network for Ethical Trade, we were all interested in supporting the companies that we work with to develop a more robust approach to meaningful stakeholder engagement. Across the different organisations that have supported this work, we represent companies who are all working to strengthen their approach to human rights due diligence. For many of them, this topic is one that is quite challenging, one that they know they need to work deeper on, and they need to get more involved in. And the purpose for developing this guidance is really to advance their work and advance that conversation, but also to help encourage meaningful stakeholder engagement along supply chains. So to get suppliers to the companies that we work with involved in it and their suppliers involved in it. So as you'll see from today's webinar, we're going to hear from a number of speakers. What we've tried to develop is an extremely practical guidance that can take the conversation forward. It is focused on agriculture and food, but there are many examples from different sectors. So in terms of today's session, what you're going to hear from the different speakers, we're going to start with Danny Miles from the ETI, who's going to talk about why this topic matters and what the benefits are. Then we're going to hear from Mira Elestic at Oxfam, who's going to talk us through the guidance and explain what you can find in there. And then we'll get some practical examples from Louise Nichols at FNet and Andy York, who's joining us from Pilgrims. We'll talk about how companies are actually doing this work. So some of the people that have contributed to the guidance talking about the work that they've done so far. So you'll be hearing from all of those speakers, and as I said, you'll have a chance to use the Q&A to ask them questions. Just wanted to mention very briefly what this collaboration represents. As you saw from that first slide, there's a lot of organisations that have been involved in developing this guidance, and I think what that really represents is that this is not work that can be done by one organisation on its own. Collaboration isn't always easy, but I think all of us involved in this developing this guidance have found it extremely fruitful and really beneficial to work across different organisations. So just to get us started, we would like to do a poll. So Laura, if you could launch our first poll for us. This is to give us a sense of, for those of you on the call today, where you are on meaningful stakeholder engagement. So you may be representing an organisation, you may be in academia, you may be in the not-for-profit sector. Tell us what you know about meaningful stakeholder engagement and how you've been working on it. Is it something that you haven't started work on? Is it something that you don't really know where to start? Are you trying to get internal traction? Are you one of those companies that has started working on this in pockets? So you've got stakeholders in some areas that you're engaging with, but not all. Just getting a message, Laura, that the poll's disappeared. Could we open it again? I don't know if that's possible. I can see it on my screen. Maybe that if you voted that it's disappeared. Great. Hopefully people can see that. Or you might be an organisation that is really been doing a lot of work on this. I can see we've got a few people there who are interested in deepening the work they're doing on meaningful stakeholder engagement. And we've got one or two organisations on the call, which is great, who've already embedded this into the way they work. So it's very much part of how they assess, decide and act. If you have put other, and I can see a few people have answered other, please feel free to pop in the chat why you've answered other, if you've got interesting comments to share. Okay, we'll give that a little bit longer. We'll give that a couple, maybe one more minute just to get a few more answers. I think at the moment, the majority of people are in that category of started in pockets. So we've got about 36% of people that have started doing this work in pockets. We've also got about 20% of people on the call who are looking at how they can deepen their approach to meaningful stakeholder engagement, which is great. So I think in the interest of time, we will end the poll there. And Laura, if you could share the results, that would be great. Hopefully everyone can see the results. So we've got a good mix. We've got some people on the call that are right at the beginning of the journey. Interesting that the percentage that are stuck on getting internal traction, maybe that's something people can share in the chat. If you have managed to get over that hurdle, what have you done? And then great to see that we've got quite a lot of organisations that have started this work and are looking to deepen it. So I will hand over at this point. If we can stop sharing the poll, please, Laura. We'll hand over at this point. We'll have a chance for more polls later during the session. And please do use the chat as we go along if you want to share more on your approach. You should be able to see the results. I'll try that again. Hopefully people can see the results now. Great, I'm going to hand over to you, Danny. Danny's going to talk us through understanding the why. Why do we need this work? And why is this important? Over to you, Danny. Thank you.
Thanks, Louise, and good morning, everybody. So, yeah, I'm Danny from ETI. For those of you who don't know us, we are a leading alliance of companies, trade unions, NGOs working together to drive improvement for workers in global supply chains. And our entire approach at ETI is founded on MSE fundamentally. So I'm really pleased to be here and finally be able to share the guidance with you after such a huge amount of work from everybody that's been involved in this. And whilst the guidance and tools you're going to hear about today are certainly very detailed, very comprehensive, I think it's good to remind everybody that MSE, and I will be calling it MSE, it's too much of a mouthful to talk about a stakeholder engagement all the way through. It is nothing new. I mean, doesn't need you to learn any complicated new concepts or new language. And as we just saw there, many of you on the webinar today are already conducting stakeholder engagement on a regular basis in support of your human rights due diligence. So the point here is about how to make that meaningful. And that's where this guidance really sits. And making it truly meaningful needs commitment, it needs planning, it's going to take investment in relationships and resources, and it needs support. And that's why the guidance has been developed, right, to provide a consistent and practical approach for designing MSE-led approaches throughout food and agriculture supply chains. And we can see there the official definition up on the slide, but I think we'd like to try and make this a bit more straightforward today. So I think MSE fundamentally is the process of engaging your stakeholders in genuine, safe, respectful, ongoing dialogue to ensure that their perspectives can meaningfully shape company decisions and improve human rights. So when we talk about stakeholders, we mean rights holders in this context. So in food and agriculture, this will be workers, fishers, growers, packers, processors, farmers, and their impacted community members. And also their legitimate representatives, such as trade unions, for example, and business partners in the supply chain and other government and local actors. And I think it is important to note here, I feel it implies certainly as ETI to remind everyone that where a legitimate trade union exists, they should always be considered the primary representation of workers and prioritised for that consultation. But we also know that that's not always the case, particularly in lower tiers of agriculture. So other groups can play that role. And the guidance will give you great examples of how that can be done. Engagement itself is ultimately about speaking to those rights holders and stakeholders. So that engagement should be responsive, it should be ongoing, and it should include things like collecting human rights information, consultation, collaboration, clear dialogue and negotiation. But to make this meaningful is the bit that requires companies to really engage stakeholders in a way that enables genuine, two-way, good faith dialogue on the issues of greatest interest to those stakeholders. And vitally, crucially, this must lead to action. That's what makes it meaningful, right? Ultimately, it's about making sure that the right people are consulted before a business makes decisions that have the potential to contribute and significantly affect them. So making sure that they are heard, their views are genuinely considered, again, crucially, before those decisions are made. And this makes it relevant at all stages of the human rights due diligence process. If you're in policy development, mitigation, remedy, communication, and we've structured the guidance and tools around that principle. So you'll be able to see exactly how MSE can be deployed at each stage and get practical, useful advice to do this, either on your own or ideally in collaboration with others to really maximize that impact. Next slide, please, Mira, I think. Okay, yeah, so why is MSE particularly important in this sector, in the food and agri sector? These are complex, long, fragmented supply chains with several intermediaries and really high degrees of opacity in many cases. The nature of the work involved, especially in primary agriculture and harvesting, leads to a reliance of informal, temporary, migrant workers, often intersecting risks relating to gender and the precarity of that work. Work is often also dangerous and conducted in remote areas, and seafood in particular presents an exceptional challenge here. And you also have, I mean, these factors lead to significant power imbalances throughout all tiers of the supply chain, which often lead to the costs and human rights risk being pushed down that chain onto suppliers, onto smallholders, workers, and communities who are not equipped to manage this effectively on their own. And all this leads to this clear requirement that most of us on the call understand for really effective human rights due diligence. And an MSE-based approach provides you a clear framework to do that, how to deliver it in a much more efficient and effective way. Next slide, please, Mira. Okay, yeah, so the legislative context is really important. You can see from the soft law requirements up on the slide, stakeholder engagement has always been a fundamental part of human rights diligence, expressly called out in the UNGP's, OECD guidance on responsible business conduct, but also lots of other instruments as well. And engagement in this context has always intended to be meaningful, but the requirement has now been formalised into the language of MSE by recent legislation, particularly through EUCS Triple D, even after review and dilution following the omnibus. And the presence of MSE in both those key instruments under UNGP OECD also makes it highly likely that it will be included in future iterations of MHRD legislation that are under discussion around the world or emerging now. So it's really important that businesses globally have an understanding of this and how to manage it. And having the concept enshrined in hard law for the first time is a really significant step, right? Getting UNGP language into legislation is critical for the work that we all do. And it means that MSE itself has moved from being voluntary, from being a really good thing to do, to being something that's mandatory, need to be demonstrated, be measured, reported on, monitored. And it also means many of you on the webinar today at supplier level will be hearing from your customers with concerns about this and will be receiving requests to either support or implement MSE in your own supply chains. And ultimately, this was the catalyst for the alliance of organizations you're hearing from today to come together to develop this clear, consistent guidance and practical tools so you can all implement this across the sector. Next slide. I think it's my last slide, Mira, next. So yeah, so lastly from me, keeping it on track for the time, the benefits of adopting an MSE-based approach in your human rights due diligence are hopefully quite obvious. I mean, first and foremost, this is fundamentally about respecting the rights of people in your supply chains, both in and out of that workplace. It's about building trust, treating people decently with respect, and getting genuine ongoing insight into the impact of your actions, of your business. And that will lead to ultimately more resilient, more sustainable, and commercially successful supply chains that are aligned with international standards and legislation. But doing this work and effectively as part of your due diligence will also undoubtedly reduce the likelihood of things going wrong further down the line, which should be a huge incentive, I think, for all of you to get hold of the guidance, if you're not in that space yet, to start to make a start, understand what you can do and contribute. And I think, Mira, that's time from me. So I'm handing back to Louise for a short poll.
Lovely.
Thanks, Louise.
Thank you very much indeed, Danny. Thank you so much for setting the context so brilliantly for us. And thank you too. I can see a couple of questions coming in, which we will definitely get to in the Q&A. We're also trying to answer them live at the moment. So thank you very much to Sanjida and Alistair for asking those questions, some interesting questions around engaging with organisations at the beginning of the supply chain and also power imbalances, which are definitely things that we've tried to address in the guidance. So I think the link to the guidance was shared right at the beginning of the session. You're welcome as we go through to have a quick look at how those things are being addressed and to share your comments later. Please do keep sharing your questions through the Q&A. We're going to do another short poll at this point. So we want to find out what the need is of people on the call. So the second poll is looking at the barriers that you've faced so far in engaging rights holders. Appreciate very much that we've got very different stakeholders on the call. So some of you might say if you're working in civil society organisations that actually you don't have any barriers because that's the nature of your organisation. Perhaps others, for those of you that are representing the companies and businesses, may have found more barriers. But I think through the process of developing this guidance, really what we had in mind was some of the barriers that we've included in this poll, that oftentimes there are challenges around really just knowing where to start and what to do. The previous poll highlighted, often there can be challenges about getting buy-in, that this is an important part of due diligence. Simply resources can be a real challenge. And then there are other challenges around knowing where to start and who to engage and who to prioritise, and definitely a challenge around actually how to reach the right people, particularly if you're a company based in a particular part of the world and you're trying to reach rights holders in a very different part of the world. There's also a key challenge that we know a lot of people that as we were doing the consultation on this work, that Mira's going to talk about, about how do you engage at scale, who are the right proxies to use. So just getting a few more of those answers in, and then we'll share some of those. Interesting to see people can answer more than one of these. So lots of sort of barriers that people are identifying similar to the ones that we've seen. Definitely knowing who to engage is coming out as a key barrier for a lot of people, as well as lack of resources. And then when we look further down this list, obviously the reaching rights holders and identifying legitimate representatives or credible proxies is resonating with people, as is building trust. Again, as previously, if you've answered other, we know that we don't have all the answers by any means. So if you've answered other and there are particular barriers that you faced for whichever organisation that you're working with, please do feel free to put those in the chat. I can see that Alistair's highlighted language. I think that's a really great one. Thank you, Alistair, to have highlighted. And just to emphasize on that, this guidance will be available in different languages. Mira will touch on that shortly, but we have tried to work as much as possible as we can on that barrier itself. Okay, I think we'll end the poll there, and we will share the results so that people can see them. Yeah, thank you, Sally. There's another comment in the chat about what to do when there are conflicting views, which I think is a really great point. Maybe we'll try and come to that in the Q&A when we get there. Great, so hopefully everyone can see the results. As I said, please do feel free to add anything else in to the chat in terms of other thoughts that you have of things that we might have missed. Great, so we are going to move on now. I am going to hand over to Mira, who is going to talk through the guidance, talk about who it's for, how we developed it, and talk you through what you'll find in the guidance. As I've mentioned a couple of times, you'll see in the chat the link. Please do feel free to open up the document and have a look as Mira is presenting. Over to you, Mira. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Louise. I'm really pleased to give you a sneak peek into the guidance today. So our aim today is to orient you to the guidance. So rather than diving very deeply into every chapter, I want to give you an idea of the guidance, the key themes, and the tools, so that after the webinar, you know where to go deeper and how the guidance can support your work going forward. So how is the guidance developed? So it was primarily written by Oxfam, so based on our experience, both working with companies in the sector, but of course also engaging with rights holders. But it was very much a co-creation effort, so where we worked very closely with the organizations that you see on the screens. And then importantly, we had consultations with companies, trade unions, CSOs, and rights holders. So during the development process, we heard very powerful reflections like the one you see from rights holders. And then at the same time, we heard many companies saying that they generally want to engage more meaningfully with the workers, farmers, communities, but also trade unions and civil society, but struggle with practical questions. So where do we start? Who should we engage? How do we prioritize? How do we build trust? And how do we know whether engagement is actually effective? So that's the gap we're hoping to address. Now, how the guidance is structured. So one thing to emphasize is that the guidance is designed to be practical and easy to navigate, and you do not need to read it cover to cover. So some may want, the deeper understanding and context that we give in part 1, or others may want to go directly to part 2, so where we give step-by-step guidance on who to engage, how to engage, and when to engage. Or others may want to dive directly into the additional resources that we are giving. So we have a standalone Annex C where we provide, for example, practical tools that you can download and fill out. So the guidance is designed both for companies starting their engagement journey and for those looking to strengthen their existing approaches. Now, what good looks like. In the introduction, we dive into a couple of principles, of engagement. Of course, this is about putting people truly at the center, listening to them in good faith and with respect. And then, we dive into these principles and we unpack them, giving concrete examples from companies. So, for example, if it's about making sure engagement is inclusive and you want to make sure that, you're also engaging women, is it, for example, taking into consideration childcare responsibilities? And then, as Dani also said, we also stress throughout the guidance the importance of legitimate representation, so including trade unions. And then the other key message is that engagement shouldn't be symbolic. So as Dani also stressed, it should lead to concrete action and better outcomes. So you're not doing engagement for engagement's sake. It's, the goal ultimately is to improve lives and strengthen rights. And that's also why we stress in the guidance that, meaningful stakeholder engagement cannot sit only with sustainability teams. So internal incentives, purchasing practices and leadership buy-in, they all shape very strongly whether engagement can actually lead to change. Now, a couple of you mentioned, that they struggle with leadership buy-in. And in the guidance, in the introduction, we give a couple of practical tips also from companies on what helped them to get leadership buy-in. And I think Andy later will talk also about that. Now, building trust, that also came through very clearly in the consultation that, meaningful engagement is fundamentally about trust. And many rights holders, communities have previously experienced where engagement felt extractive, symbolic, or led to no visible action. So that means, as a company, sometimes you cannot assume that trust already exists. It needs to be built over time. And therefore, the guidance places a strong emphasis on issues like accessibility, safe participation, but also follow up, being transparent about what you can do and what you cannot do, and recognizing power imbalances. And then again, that it's not only about listening, but also about responding and showing how input influences decisions. Now, the tools that we have developed. So one challenge companies raised repeatedly was understanding who to engage and how to prioritize stakeholders. And that also came through in the polls, right? So we developed this tool that helps companies to take a more systematic and risk-based approach to engagement. And, that's so important, especially if you have, thousands of supply chains. So this tool helps you focus on those most at risk, looking at issues such as, gender or other characteristics of identity. And then it's very much tailored or designed specifically for the realities of the sector. So, for example, making sure that you're not missing any important rights holders, like you may have workers that are only in your supply chain for a couple of days throughout the year, during harvest season. So it takes you through that entire process and helps you build a stakeholder dashboard at the end. Then we also have a data collection and management tool. So one question we received is, how can we as a company assess whether our engagement is successful or whether it is actually effective? So this tool helps you measure that. So it gives you a couple of indicators, but also data sources you can use. And then it helps you, measure the quality of your engagement and then all the way to the impact of the engagement. So it's, not just about whether engagement happened, but whether engagement is leading to meaningful outcomes for people. So some of the most important indicators, they will be a bit harder to measure. So it's about, trust, whether people felt heard or whether they felt that harms were actually being addressed. So really indicators that get to the heart of the issues. Now some final reflections. Meaningful stakeholder engagement, it's not about perfection from day one. It's very much a learning journey, and the key is to start with the right intentions. But that's so key, especially in this sector where we have such systemic human rights and environmental risks. Creating safe and meaningful ways for people to shape decisions that affect their lives. And we hope that this guidance can support you in that important work.
Great. Thank you so much, Mira. That was brilliant. We gave Mira a really impossible task of trying to, in 10 minutes, describe everything that's in the guidance. But I think you've done a brilliant job to give people the overview and help them understand what to expect. So we're going to move on now and take what Danny and Mira have both presented and look at practically how our companies actually doing this work. And it's fantastic that we have got Andy York from Pilgrims joining us today to give their perspective and how they've been working in this area. And Louise Nichols is going to facilitate the conversation with Andy. Just briefly before I hand over to Louise, please just to encourage you to carry on putting your questions in the Q&A, but also we've got some fabulous input coming in through the chat, ideas, examples, people that have been working in this space, sharing their perspectives. All of that is really rich and helpful and makes it a great experience for those that are taking part to see the different perspectives on the call. So please do feel free to input on those. But I will hand over to Lou and Andy. Over to you guys. Thank you very much for joining us, Andy, today.
Hello, everyone. Lovely to see you, and it's fantastic to see the turnout. It just shows that this is clearly a topic that really resonates and people are keen to learn. I'm Louise Nichols. I'm the Executive Director at the Food Network for Ethical Trade. We bring together 85 food retailers, food manufacturers, food producers to work on advancing human rights. And one of our members is Pilgrims Europe. And I'm delighted Andy's joining us today. And just for anyone who's not familiar with Pilgrims Europe, they're a leading UK and European food manufacturer. They've got kind of 40 facilities employing over 20,000 people. And so nothing better than getting Andy to kind of help us bring this to life in terms of what does this look like. So I guess, Andy, let's just get ourselves started. So why is it so important to put rights holders at the very centre of meaningful stakeholder engagement?
Well, we're a big business and our impact can be huge. And it's important that when we're trying to do work in our supply chain, that it's actually having the effect that we want it to have. You can do lots of tick box exercises or, greenwashing or making things look nice, but are you actually impacting anyone? And we felt this is kind of the best way to start that. It also helps us check our knowledge. Do we know our supply chains enough? And really helps bring to life the difference it can make for whatever ingredient or product we're talking about.
And Andy, when you started the kind of thinking about this process, you purposely picked to look at your own operations first. What was the strategic reason for doing that?
I'm a firm believer of if you can't do something yourself, you can't expect your suppliers or your supply chain to do it. So I'm a firm believer you put your money where your mouth is. And it's been a learning process. I think when we started it, it was probably a bit disjointed and not really a more joined up approach. And then kind of each time we've engaged in some, it's got a little bit more professional and a little bit more responsive back to the rights holders as well. I think we were guilty of not closing that loop and following back up with rights holders after we've done some work. So yeah, that's improved with time, but certainly you have to do it yourself if you're going to ask your suppliers to do anything. As an own label supplier to multiple customers, there are customers that do not talk the talk and there are customers that do. So it's always been my belief that's the way forward.
Yeah, I'm a firm believer of that too, Andy, because that way, if you learn about the barriers, you can be much more practical in the advice you give to suppliers as well. So I mean, let's dive into this in a little bit more detail. So, when you're kind of organising like a meaningful rights holder engagement session with workers, what are some of your top tips? How to get that right? Because as you say, you've learned through it that maybe you didn't get it right the first time. So, what would be your top tips for others on the call?
Think about language and think about how you talk to people. What you don't want to come across as is either patronizing or in kind of a usual audit tone. So be very clear with people why you're doing this, what the impacts for them may be. If they're your supplier, you want them to be open and honest, but you also want to reassure them, look, this is not going to affect you from a commercial point of view. We're not going to make decisions on whether we place business with you on the answers you give us. We're doing this because we want to find out more about our supply chain and our impacts and anything we can do to improve. So we want you to be open and honest. If you can have kind of a third party person who can introduce that and talk it through, it takes away that bit of them and us type methodology. Prepare within the business. I think that's probably what took longer than I thought, is making sure internally people know why you're doing this. And, don't forget those outlying areas in your business, such as finance, technical, commercial people, because there is always a plus side to what you are doing. And they almost may guide you in a direction you haven't thought of before as well. And be prepared for bad news and not getting the glowing feedback you may think you deserve as a business. Prepare your leadership team for that. When we first did our first human rights impact assessment, I spent a long time with our exec explaining, look, if you don't get the answers that you want, that's still good, because that's 100% giving you the feedback that you need to do something. And it then kind of gives you license to change things. It's not just the random sustainability expert saying we should do this. There's actually people within your supply chain and experienced people such as your farming community saying, actually, this is what you should be doing, or this is, carry on doing what you're doing because of X, Y, Z. So yeah, it can be a bit of a shock to people because you're almost actively opening criticism, which and then publicly reporting it. So
Andy, let's just delve into that a little bit more. So you've been out, you've gathered all this feedback, and unfortunately some of it's quite critical. Kind of, what's the next step? How do you kind of engage the business or the supplier in kind of coming up with an action plan and perhaps a remediation plan to those issues? How do you do that?
Again, it's about being open and honest, and it's being realistic. Don't try and change the world in a couple of months. If you've had something that's a systemic issue, don't be afraid of breaking things down into little steps, and then going back to people and saying, look, we've changed this. Have you seen that improve? Before you move on to the next step. So it's kind of having those regular check-ins and look backs, and do go back and talk to the people that you originally spoke to, even if it's just to acknowledge and say, right, we hear what you're saying, we're working on a plan to change something around that. Please give us some time and then we'll come back and talk to you again. So don't rush into making quick decisions, I would say, because it can be easily done, especially if you're getting pressure from above with, you've just released a load of bad news, what could be seen as a load of bad news. We need to make things look better, type of thing. So don't get caught in that kind of corporate trap of having to improve things just for the corporate comms people.
Yeah, I mean, it's also fair to say that often the people who have experienced that negative situation often have great ideas about what
How
it
to
could
fix
look
it.
like
Yeah.
and how to fix it. And so if you involve them in the co-creation, you'll often end up with a much better solution than you would do if you try to impose something you thought was a good fix. So I agree with you. I think sometimes slower process involves people, gets you to a much better outcome. But it's hard, isn't it, when corporate businesses want to rush to the solution rather than give it time and sit with the uncomfortableness of it. In terms of, for those on the call who are saying, "Gosh, like, how do I sell the business case to this? Why do this? What's the benefit?"
I think what we found is sometimes it actually just confirms what we thought, but it's coming from the people who are experiencing it, not just people within the business. And also it can be quite positive. Sometimes we've gone in and done human rights impacts assessments and you expect a big long list of negatives, but actually people then actually do tell you about the positives. And then that's really nice because that's then reassuring to know, okay, so yes, these things might be wrong, but actually people have noticed that these things are right and these things are good. So we keep doing those and then try and improve those. So it's a continuous battle. There's always a churn in senior leadership. So sometimes you have to be prepared to go back to the start with a new somebody who may come in and then start questioning why the hell are you doing this work or that work. And also sometimes it might take you off in a completely different tangent. So don't be afraid if you can link it back to what stakeholders are requesting. It doesn't have to answer something that you may have asked 2 or 3 years ago. You could still be working on. So, if situations change or the outlook or the business world changes, then maybe you need to reframe some of it and go back again. And that's kind of one of the things we're currently in the process doing, is looking at the results from one of our HRAs from a couple of years ago and independently getting it reviewed to say, right, have we done those things? Have they made a difference? Do rights holders feel that it's now different? So it's making sure and that's the bit that I guess the guidance is really helpful from my point of view with, is having that full circle and not forgetting to you're going to keep going round continuously in a circle, but don't be afraid of that.
Yeah, it's an iterative process, isn't it? So I guess, obviously here today we're launching this new guidance tool. You've had a chance to be all over the tool as you've been kind of an important contributor. Is there any specific area when you look at the guidance you'd say, gosh, if we could do one thing more, this is the specific area where you think you'd like further help?
I think for us it's making sure that we are picking the right relevant people and the right mechanism to talk to them. And taking that time beforehand to kind of plan how and who and where and what. That can sometimes be, having conversations with people in a kind of more relaxed atmosphere is sometimes better than dragging everyone into a meeting room and kind of presenting at them. So how do you facilitate and how can you get that going, and making sure the right people are involved? I think that's the bit that's really helped us kind of question and structure it more going forward. So
fantastic. Thank you, Andy. I could talk to you all day, but I'm aware of time. So Louise, back to you.
Lovely. Don't go yet. If you can both stay. I know you're not going anywhere, but just very quick. There are quite a few questions for you, Andy, both in the chat and in the Q&A, which we're not going to get through all of them, but maybe we can just cover a couple. So I think one was, Andy, about effectiveness monitoring through MSC. So I think this is how have you used MSE to work out whether what you're doing is effective? And they've asked, did you go and speak to people, use surveys, mix of due diligence tools? So I think they're asking a bit on the sort of the tools and how it works. And then the second question was about how you've handled or resolved issues that required significant commercial investment. So thinking about working hours or wages, that one might be a bit harder to answer in like 2 minutes. But yeah, anything you can give us on those would be great, Andy. And we can always come back to you in the Q&A if that's okay.
I think our approach to taking the first one of how to communicate with people, I think, to be honest, it's been pretty old-fashioned. It's been sit down, talk to people, explain to people, have some kind of clear guidance up front. That's been especially important with some of our internal teams. So some of our farming teams that are out on farms with farmers, for them to understand what we're doing properly, to explain to any questions from farmers when they get an invite to something that, look, this is what it's for. It's not an audit, it's not a tick box. We didn't really use any surveys or kind of a mix of communication. Farmers, especially British farmers, are very direct if you ask them questions, and are quite willing to give you answers once you get them in a room. So I think the more difficulty is getting people there. I think if, we've been lucky, it's been the same language that we've been using. We've not done this ourselves in an international context. Obviously, we've used consultancies that have used local people for when it's local on the ground in the Far East, etc. But when it's been in UK and UK farming, it's a lot easier. You just need to get them in a room and just have a conversation, talk to them. Like, don't treat it like an audit. Don't have a list of kind of set questions. Have the topic areas you want to cover, but be quite loose how you talk about it. The more informal you are, the better kind of response you get from people.
Right. Thank you.
And then resolving issues that require commercial investment, you need to then talk to commercial people about it. We have had a few cases where it has needed us to be paying an improved premium to farmers, etc. You talk to commercial people, you build that into your commercial models. These are the things that take the long time. So that might take 2 years to realize because of when we contract or how we buy. But yeah, there are always things always cost money. But there's sometimes ways around, and there's improvements that you find that actually can save you a bit of money on one side that could release some money to then engage in another.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Andy. That's really great. I think I can see there's loads more questions coming in. I'm not sure we're going to be able to answer all of them in our 12 remaining minutes, but I'm going to hand over to Maria in a second, and she's going to do her best to share either ones with you, Andy, or with other speakers. Anything that we don't get answered today, we will find a way of answering them in written form, so we can share that with attendees of this webinar and the one later. We were going to do a final very quick poll. I don't know, Laura, if you could just pop that up for us. That was really just for us to get a sense of what people are most hoping to get out of the guidance. So maybe we could leave that poll up while I hand over to Maria, and Maria is going to coordinate the Q&A. But yeah, massive thank you to Andy and Lou. I think it's really great to bring this to life. And yeah, I know from the comments, people have been really appreciating hearing the practical steps that Andy's been taking. So yeah, if you can also just give your responses to the third poll that's up there, we can share the results, maybe Laura, when we've got to about 100 people. But I'll hand over to you, Maria, to bring us through the Q&A.
Thank you, Louise. Hi, everyone. My name is Maria Alejandra Pulido, and I am the Global Advisor for Stakeholder Engagement and Partnerships here in amfori. Let me go through the different questions. I see that we have a very dynamic conversation already, so thank you so much for sharing those. I think that we can start with this question from Alistair, who is actually referring to how key stakeholders at the beginning of a supply chain can meaningfully engage with lead companies. We know that this is one of the main questions that different companies have. So I think that I will give this question to Andy, actually. I think that you will be a really good one to lead on this one.
I mean, for me, it's quite simple. You find who they are. If you map your supply chain properly and spend that time understanding who the rights holders are and why they would have an interest is also important. And then you may have to illustrate to them why you have an interest in talking to them as well. So it's quite a lot of, that sounds a really wishy-washy answer, but it's kind of doing that pre-work of understanding who and why and what they can benefit from. So if you've got a bit of an idea when you're talking to people or when someone is talking to them on your behalf, they can kind of illustrate that point for you. It's also important not to try and do a scattergun approach and go to lots and lots and lots, but then not actually get enough qualitative feedback. So yeah, there's a bit of a balance, I would say.
Thank you, Andy. We have another question that is coming from Yael, and I think that this one it's very important because it's referring to how engagement should be actionable. But sometimes it's very difficult to have a concrete mechanism that can ensure that we are engaging with the right holders and as well understand that their inputs are actually going to change or create any change in companies. I think that this question will be more for you, Mira, and you maybe can give us some insights on how exactly here in the guidance we are tackling this point, how it can be more practical, how we can put it more actionable. Mira, over to you.
Sorry, so the outcomes, like what rights holders tell you, how that can lead to change? Is that a question?
Yes, rather than just focusing on mere compliance or being documented and just put it in a shelf, how exactly is that this engagement can lead to action, can be more practical?
Yeah. So I think like the data management tool that we presented and that we have in the guidance, I think that will hopefully really help companies do just that, so that you're not looking at your engagement. So who are you engaging? How is the quality of that engagement? But then also, does that lead to changes in your business? So, for example, are you changing policies or purchasing practices based on what rights holders are telling you? And then does that lead to change in the end?
Thank you, Mira. And I have a very interesting one for Danny, and I think that you're going to enjoy this question. This is actually opened the door to how lead companies have invested resources to empowering key right holders, as an example, trade unions. I know that this is not an easy one, but I'm sure, Danny, that you can give us a couple of examples.
I'm just trying to find the actual question. Is that one from Maria? Can you tell me?
This is from Alistair Smith.
Okay.
How lead companies can invest resource in empowering key right holders, as an example, trade unions.
Well, I think it's critical. I mean, as I said, certainly at ETI, how we're structured, part of how we also encourage all of our members to take that step and engage with trade unions in particular as part of that process. As I mentioned at the start, where a trade union exists, then it has to be the primary point of representation for those workers and should be prioritized for engagement. So under our ETI base code, for example, all businesses that commit to that are making a commitment to freedom of association, and that's absolutely critical in this process. So giving workers that voice, and businesses slowly are starting to, I think, realize that there's a key role for them to play there, how they can get genuine benefits from working through organizations and investing in that to get some outcomes. So I think Alistair, it's a really good point, and Alistair is also a member of ETI, so I'm very keen to continue the conversation with him. But as you check in the guidance, you'll see that we've we've definitely put in elements of how this can be done more effectively. It's a difficult question to answer in one go, Alistair, but hopefully that goes some way towards it.
Thank you, Danny. I see that we still have several questions here, so let's try to do our best to answer a couple. There is another one from Melissa Villanueva, and she's asking how companies be sure that they are listening rather than just attempting to de-risk to training right holders. I think that this question will be a good one for Louise Nichols.
Yeah, I think it's, as we all know, that's the danger, isn't it? You go to get the answer you want to hear as a company rather than actually hearing what's said. And so I think, as Andy says, sometimes it can be really helpful to use an independent organization because they're going to really hear everything that's said. But otherwise, it is really just to make sure that you have noted down all those different opinions. You might use some digital tools as well to make sure there's no bias being used in the way that you're capturing some of that information, so that you can hold yourself to account to say, have we actually acted on everything that was mentioned by those rights holders? But yeah, it's something to be aware of your company's biases, because I think that is naturally what happens.
Thank you, Luis. And you were talking about listening. And there is another question from Becky, and she's more focusing on dialogue. The question is quite complex. I think that you can say it as well from the Q&A. It's Becky Milan. But I think that we can summarize it in terms of how do we approach rights holders dialogue? How exactly we can facilitate dialogue?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. There are definitely some practical advice in the tools that to have a look at. So I would recommend reading the guidance, looking at that particular bit around power dynamics, really thinking through that lens. But I think I agree with Andy. Part of this is about just starting the conversation and listening hard to what people are saying, and not being scared to not get it perfect the first time, but to keep learning, keep iterating the process, getting it better. I think it is also thinking about who else it would be helpful to have in the room to make sure that you're creating a safe, brave space for those rights holders to be able to say what they're thinking. So that might be about having civil society, it might be about having trade unions, it might be about having academics, but really thinking about what would we need to do to make sure we're creating that safe space, listening hard, thinking about how we change the power dynamics. One of the things we do at FNet is we purposely have more suppliers than retailers on our board. We really think hard about power dynamics because that is a real reality of supply chains, and that everyone wants to please the customer. But actually what we really want to do here is we want to listen hard to what are the realities, and then what can we collectively do to change them.
Thank you, Luis. I'm looking at the clock, and I think that we are already running out of time. So over to you, Luis Herring.
Thank you very much indeed, Maria. And thank you to everyone for the questions. I think, as Maria said, there were some easier to answer ones there and some really challenging ones. And I think I can speak on behalf of everyone involved in this that we don't have all the answers. I think some of those questions, particularly about power dynamics, about building rights holders' experiences into decision making, is something that does need more thought. When we showed the poll about what people wanted from this guidance, one of the things on there that really struck me was that people want best practice examples. And you can see the response to Andy's case study from today. But we really need companies to be sharing what they're doing, talking more about what's working, what's challenging, and to build up a bank of best practice in this space, I think, to start to address some of the challenges that have been put in the Q&A. And that's certainly something that we as AIM Progress are going to be taking forward with our members, is pushing for this work to be done, pushing for the lessons to be shared, but also pushing for the challenges to be shared. So a massive thank you to everyone that's joined today. A massive thank you to all our speakers. All that I need to leave you with today is to encourage you to download the guidance. You can see the QR code that's on the screen. I'm sure one of my colleagues will also pop the link into the chat. We really want your feedback. We really want to know what you think about it, what you think about the guidance, what's missing, what needs to be added, what best practice examples we missed. So there was also a feedback form which Aline is going to share in the chat as well. We will share the recording with everyone and the slides that most likely will go out next week. And if you have any Spanish colleagues or suppliers, we're running a parallel session this afternoon, which you're welcome to invite them with. There will be translation in that session. So just to say thank you very much indeed again to all our speakers. Thank you to everyone for joining. Please do keep the conversation going with us, and we hope you have a great rest of day. Thank you very much, everyone.